It's Jim, the author behind the blog Reverse Engineering the Origins of SARS-CoV-2 and the book COVID-19 Mystery Solved. This blog is going to be about the DARPA Defuse proposal. This was an important piece of evidence in the lab leak debate. So it formed the basis of not just the blog, but the backbone of my own book. So I wanted to talk about it in detail here, about the evidence inside of it, the myths that formed around it, what it was and what it was not about. So it was leaked to this. This is a document, an unfunded grant to DARPA that was leaked to the Daszak group here, and they have posted it online for all of us to see and to draw our own conclusions on here at DrasticResearch.org. This is a loose group of researchers, scientists, sleuths that had formed sometime in early 2020 to get to the bottom of the origins of SARS-CoV-2, and some unknown anonymous person with a pretty, notorious document as it is now, sent them the document and said, here it is. And we didn't know who it was, but the receiver of it was Charles Rixey, who was part of the Daszak Research Group. So to their credit, they published it. They uploaded it online. I don't think anyone else would have done it, because this document was quite the find, quite the get. So we're going to go through it here in detail and talk about it and see what was inside of it. So the timeline here was September 20th, 2021. Billy Bosticson, the leader of the Daszak group, teased us, with a new leaked document expose. Peter Daszak of EcoHealth Alliance injecting deadly chimeric bat coronaviruses collected by the Wuhan Institute of Virology into humanized and batified mice, and much, much more. So there was a whole lot more in there. This was a great teaser. It was like, what the heck's inside this thing? Because they got some pretty detailed analysis of it. But they finally uploaded it, finally, only a day later, to for all of us to see. So quick background on DARPA. It is a part of the Pentagon, the U.S. government, the DoD, inside this giant, nearly $1 trillion a year Pentagon bureaucracy, one of the largest in the world, is this relatively nimble program called DARPA, and it dates back to the Cold War, and it was, designed to keep, the U.S. military on the bleeding edge of technology, and things like, GPS in your phone, Siri on your phone, machine guns, Agent Orange, drones, drone warfare. I mean, it's all dual-use technology, but they're promoting it and pushing it. It's just relatively small, nimble bureaucracy where they push the edge. And this document and this request for quote, a BAA as they call it in the Pentagon talk, or the government bureaucracy talk, I'd call it an RFQ, or request for quote, was sent out in January of 2018. So this is 2 years before something like SARS-CoV-2 emerged, and they basically had a ton of contractors come together, and one of them was EcoHealth Alliance. So EcoHealth Alliance was there was always a dark cloud over them with the lab leak debate, because they were heavily involved with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So this was an interesting document that was not disclosed by anyone inside of it. So you can see, if you, the real important piece here is a lot of people thought this thing was so crazy it was, cooked up. But this was a public, not classified project here in January 2018, where they want to protect the warfighter, they call him, the U.S. soldier, against pandemics, against outbreaks. They got a whole list here: MERS, coronavirus, Ebola, hepatitis. I mean, all these nasty pathogens also, affect their national security needs. There's a ton of U.S. troops abroad, 100,000 in Asia, 20,000 thereabouts maybe in the Middle East, 10,000 in Africa. And, EcoHealth Alliance, the project manager, had even taken the EcoHealth Alliance research and map and overlaid it with his warfighter footprint, and noticed there's a lot of overlap between EcoHealth Alliance research and the U.S. military. So they were keen to get EcoHealth Alliance involved in this bid. So and one of the things they were talking about was bat caves and stuff. So, that's DARPA, the U.S. government, soliciting what is essentially a preemptive spillover measure of zoonotic pathogens like SARS and MERS and Ebola and whatnot, and come up with something big. They have an idea here of what they want, So they threw out to the group, we want something scalable. We want, that's another word you'll find in here quite a bit. Scalable technology, scalable technology, scalable technology, scalability, scalability. DARPA's only $3 billion out of a $1 trillion, Pentagon. It punches above its weight. So they want scalable delivery methods. One of them was self-disseminating treatments and preventatives. Transmissible recombinant vaccines was one of them. Therapeutic interfering particles, self-spreading antiviral therapies, bait vaccination, wild and domestic animals, spray-based methods. They want they're throwing an idea out there for everyone else to come up with. And so you can also see them even advertising it online in January 2018, January 2018, January 2018. And they start to announce the winners in July of 2019. So one of the winners, we'll talk about later. But let's talk about the document itself here first. It was bid on by Peter Daszak and others, but they did not win. So this was an unfunded grant by DARPA. That was a bit of a letdown because it would have been like case closed if this thing was funded, because this DARPA document was essentially a pre-confession of the crime of creating COVID. Inside of it, we'll get into the details here. But the eerie similarities between this novel virus called SARS-CoV-2 and what was proposed in the DARPA Defuse grant is just, unreal. You'll even find, the New York Times even talking about it now, 4 years later. But at the time, no one else was talking about it. So it was basically the Daszak group alone, going alone and publishing the document. The Intercept came along later, about 2 days later, and they published the document. But I don't know if they would even publish it unless Daszak went through with it. So this grant was kind of floating around, supposedly, in the background without being published, sometime in September 2021. We did not know who it was. We'll later discover who it is. But here's a good place to start, I guess, if you want to kind of get your brain around it right here. The proposal, rejected by the U.S. military research agency called DARPA, describes the insertion of a human-specific cleavage site into SARS-related bat coronaviruses. That was the shocker in this thing. Inside this document is a proposal to insert a novel furin cleavage site into a Sarbeco-like virus. So Sarbeco viruses, which is like SARS-CoV-2, don't naturally have furin cleavage sites. Something like MERS does, something like the common cold does, but Sarbeco viruses like SARS-CoV-2 do not have furin cleavage sites. So that was always like the big question in the lab leak debate. Who inserted that furin cleavage site? Because that's basically the magic sauce of the virus. Whether it emerged naturally or unnaturally, that's why it's circulating in humans. It expands the host range. It expands the organs it can go after. It expands the transmissibility. It turns it into a pandemic pathogen. So, it was always assumed that, if this thing was engineered, someone had to insert that furin cleavage site because they're just not found in Sarbeco viruses. But here's a document by, Peter Daszak of EcoHealth Alliance saying they're going to insert a furin cleavage site into a novel coronavirus. So that was the big shocker, along with a bunch of other things. So just to get it through to everyone, though, that this was a legitimate project with legitimate money. It was $40 million in total DARPA was advertising. And they finally awarded it to 5 teams, but one of the 5 were not the EcoHealth Alliance group. We'll talk about who those other 5 were, because they're almost more interesting than the people that lost in EcoHealth. But it was $40 million to go out there and find a way to preempt the next spillover event. So, and again, it's not classified, but the document was, the DARPA Defuse document itself was. Well, I'll get into it in a minute here, but I want to give you more background on DARPA. The program manager named James Gimlet. You can find him here on the document. He was the program manager at the time. Later gave testimony here. This is like late 2024 that he finally talked, and he said what he wanted: a self-disseminating vaccine or other methods. He was trying to talk about raccoons and foxes and rabies in North America, and they put out millions of samples for the bait. We actually didn't contain it, but it's a very crude and expensive way of doing it. So this is him giving you background on animal vaccines, which is a pretty normal, Western scientific endeavor. They have been vaccinating what's called the intermediate species for several decades, dropping these baited, vaccines out of planes and helicopters for the raccoons and foxes to eat, and it vaccinates them against rabies, which comes from bats. So, but it's expensive, it's expensive to fly a plane overhead and throw a bunch of baited, treats out the back of it for some random, wildlife to eat and hope it doesn't infect, Fido the family dog. So the idea was to just, maybe preempt this with self-disseminating vaccines and maybe even vaccinate the bats themselves, which harbor rabies and harbor coronaviruses and harbor Ebola. So DARPA, is pushing an idea that's pretty radical. Instead of vaccinating the intermediary species like a raccoon, vaccinate the damn bat. So as far as I can tell, there's no documentation showing it. But here he is, the DARPA program manager, basically admitting it. I want to push this technology, so this is something I've been put in charge of. So it was on in 2018. So what else did we talk about here? He's talking about other people involved in this. So this is Gimlet of the DARPA project, and he's talking about people like NIH may be involved in this. So it's where does he mention them? Down here at the bottom, I think. Yeah, NIH, DTRA, BARDA. So this is this is a big deal basically in the virology community. This DARPA project, there were a lot of people bidding on it. So it was legitimate and it was big. So again, though, it's a file that has had a lot of people talking about it. Almost so much that we can't even have a real discussion about it. So just to give you an idea, of what's inside of it, it's that furin cleavage site is a big piece of it. So you can see inside this DARPA, proposal, this grand proposal, they wanted to insert a proteolytic cleavage site into a bat coronavirus, and it would be a furin and a furin cleavage site, and that's exactly what SARS-CoV-2 has. So up until now, meaning September 2021, there was no, documentation of any, scientist anywhere on the planet wanting to stick a furin cleavage site into a sarbecovirus like SARS-CoV-2. And now we have it. We have it in a document from 2018, and it involved the Wuhan Institute of Virology. But the real shocker was it also involved the University of North Carolina. So Ralph Baric, his name was now on this document. And he has been laying, not silent, but low throughout the pandemic. There was always a bit of a dark cloud around him during the lab leak debate. He would entertain it, He would say, well, maybe there's evidence in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. We'll never figure out what it is, So good luck with that. I still think it came from nature. But I'm willing to entertain the possibility of a lab leak, even though he had been collaborating with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. He never disclosed this document. So in September 2021, this thing leaked, and his name's on it. So that was what caught my attention. For everyone else, though, they zeroed in on the Wuhan Institute of Virology and kind of, said, look, here's what we need. The Wuhan Institute of Virology was collaborating with a group of scientists who wanted to certain furin cleavage site on a novel coronavirus. This thing is, it's still debated, but I like what Angelo Rasmussen called it, a massive intercontinental research project. So, this is what EcoHealth does. They get a bunch of various vendors together, and they can propose, a massive intercontinental research project to an outfit like DARPA. And one of them was the University of North Carolina. Another one was Duke University in Singapore, Duke NUS, with Lim-Fo Wong and Daniel Anderson, which we'll talk about. Another one was who the USG has, even the United States Geological Service is on here. They get involved in bat research and bat caves there in America. So let's go through it real quick if we can. I want to, here was, it wasn't big news when it came out. There was a few organizations that covered it. The Atlantic had my, the favorite, headline. This is September 26th. They ran with their headline. The lab leak debate just got even messier. A new document is stirring up another frenzy over the pandemic origins. What does it really tell us? So, a lot of people were kind of like, yeah, it tells us a lot if you're on the lab leak origin. And even people that were on the zoonotic origin were like, wow, this is big. So it is big. It is confusing. It is a bit overwhelming. So I'll try to make this simple as I can without getting too far into the weeds. But here's another one that came out. Here's another headline that'll close out. No, the government is hiding proof that it created COVID-19. But this thing was sitting on a U.S. government server for no one else to see. So we couldn't really, get our brain around it at the time. But I don't want to get too far into the 75-page document, because that's what it is right here. I want to start off with the cover page. It is the executive summary of Peter Daszak. He's a great grant writer. He's mastered the English language. He's a Brit living in New York City running EcoHealth. I think as of time he may no longer be with EcoHealth. I'm recording this in early 2025. So he's got a great summary here. If you do not want to mess with it, you'll find these documents online. Again, go to JurassicResearch.org and you'll find all the documents there. But this one, I believe, is searchable, and I got it on the Intercept upload. So it's 75 pages. It's a lot, but we're going to have to go through it. But if you don't want to go through 75 pages, which most people don't, just look at the first page is what I tell people. That's all you really need to do. He has summarized this thing pretty well in this executive summary. So in March of 2018, he submitted his proposal, and this is what it looked like. This is, again, a year and a half, basically 2 years before the pandemic started. He is submitting a proposal to the DARPA group about preempting the next spillover event. And security concerns across Asia make the region a potential deployment for the warfighter. So Peter Daszak knows that he needs to mirror the verbiage he finds inside the RFQ, or the BAA as they call it, and you'll find the word warfighter all over the document. So this tells you what it is. It's a U.S. military project. A lot of people thought maybe since DARPA didn't fund it, maybe the Chinese did, but I find that pretty hard to believe if you just sit there and look at all the warfighter verbiage all over this document. Troops face the increased risk of SARS-like viruses, which are shed via urine and feces of bats as they forage at night. So that tells you what he's targeting right here: bats that harbor SARS viruses. That's called the Chinese horseshoe bat. You'll find a picture of one here probably if this wasn't such a bad copy of it. But this is all we had to work with. Our work in Yunnan, that's down there by the Moijing mine shaft, and the infamous RATG-13 sample, are a clear and present danger to U.S. defense forces in the region. Our goal is to analyze, predict, and diffuse. I love the term he came up with for the title of this thing. We're going to diffuse the spillover potential of novel bat origin high-risk SARS-like viruses in Southeast Asia. So safeguard the U.S. warfighter. Our strategy is based on immune parameters that are found across all taxonomic groups. If successful, it can be adapted. And I love it. He's really selling this well to the group. MERS. You can adapt it to other pathogens in Africa: Hydra, Nipah, Ebola, Marburg, and he wants a lot of money for it. A lot. I'll get into the details of that here, but there's a phase 1, which is basically go out there and find the bat and do something about it. And then phase 2, which is go out there and vaccinate the damn bat. So this is phase 1 would be like the lab work, and phase 2 would be the field work. And you can see that his phase 1 is $8 million. That's a lot, but his phase 2 was even almost as much, 5.5, 5.75. So his total is 14.2 million. He's expensive, but he's proud of what he does, and he's pretty good at what he does too. Again, he's not, Peter Daszak and EcoHealth don't have labs. They just subcontract the stuff to the One Institute of Virology and the University of North Carolina and Duke University. And he goes on here further here about what he's going to be doing. He's talking about mobile apps, quasi, species and jump potential. It's really kind of makes your head spin at first when you look at this thing. But I want to focus in on a few things here. He wants to, the intervention and development. A lot of people debate, what the DARPA Defuse document's about. This is where I kind of already diverge from other people's thoughts. And a lot of people don't want to admit that it's about, creating a bat vaccine. And that's essentially what they proposed here. We're going to inoculate bats with immune modulators. In concert with the above, inoculate bats with chimeric, recombinant spike proteins. Adaptive immune memory. They're talking about the immune system of bats. Essentially, we're gonna punch it into our models, and we're gonna predict where the next spillover could come in. And with wildlife vaccine delivery, we're gonna do this. So automated aerosolization onto bats. That word aerosolization caught a lot of people's attention since SARS-CoV-2 is aerosolized. Maybe that's part of this little proposal. So. No technology exists to reduce exposure to novel bat coronaviruses. No therapeutics, no countermeasures. So we can vaccinate the bats, though, is the idea. We're going to vaccinate what's called the reservoir species, as crazy as this sounds, but it's not that crazy in the grand scheme of things. Virologists, again, are they're wildlife experts, they're vaccinologists, they're I like to call them animal lovers in a way, even though they do a lot of dissecting of animals. They love them. So you'll see the word bat immunity here. Upregulating the bat immune system. They're getting into some details about the bat immune system here, immunological, patterns across the family. So this thing is about the immune system of a bat. And here we are, they're talking about CRISPR. We'll talk about that. That's basically another form that they were asking for in the DARPA Defuse documents. CRISPR is kind of sexual reproduction and re-engineering it, out the bad stuff and engineering in the good stuff. But that's done slowly over time through sexual reproduction. They want to deliver a vaccine in time. So this project was going to be over 3.5 years. So it was a multi-year, multi-million, multi-sub-grant, a proposal here. So this is a kind of an important part. The immune modulators are more likely to be effective than CRISPR. So they want to target the immune system of bats, direct bats, because CRISPR, as it's known, gene editing, gene drives, they're relatively long-lived, kind of like us humans, highly mobile, and have a long intergenerational periods, 2 to 5 years, with low pup progeny. So he's basically saying there's only 1 or 2 bats born per year per mom. So trying to engineer out these gene drive endeavors is just pointless, because it's not like a mosquito where you can use CRISPR. This is more like a bat that has at least 3 or 4 decades on this earth. So it's kind of pointless to try and engineer in sexual reproduction. So they just want to go for the vaccine. So that's what this thing's about. Not so much a bat vaccine per se, but to target the bat's immune system through various, mechanisms. So if you just don't want to dive into the details of it, this is it. All you need to look at really here is this. They are going to deliver, a vaccine, or we'll call it immune, modulators to the bats. First in the lab here in phase 1, and then out in the field in phase 2. So again, this wasn't funded because it was so damn expensive. The people that did win we'll talk about, but they were cheaper, like half as much, like $7-8 million total, phase 1 and phase 2. They're 14 because they're expensive. Bats are really not easy to target out in the wild. They're these deep remote caves, and it's not easy to get to them. So if you want to deliver a vaccine to a bat, you can't just drop a tasty little treat out the plane and have it eat it, because bats are pretty much picky eaters, in particular these Chinese horseshoe bats. So let's see where this takes us. This is the 75-page document now. One of the first things you'll notice here is this cover page tells us who's all involved. So it's Wuhan, Chapel Hill, North Carolina, UNC, New York is EcoHealth, Singapore is Duke Nuss, and Madison, Wisconsin, that was the USGS. So the top line here basically says the technical approach. Our goal is to diffuse the potential spillover of novel bat pathogens. And TA1, this is an important concept that'll come up later. Technical area 1, and there's a technical area 2. In technical area 1, we're gonna sample bats intensively. This kind of sounds like what Tony Fauci was funding with EcoHealth. It's called the R01 grant that was already going on in 2014 or renewed in 2019. Where they're out there sampling bats and taking the samples back to the one Institute of Virology, and they're fiddling with it, and you'll see like the WIB1 and SHC 014, kind of samples that are used inside the one Institute of Virology, and some of these are also used in UNC. So, but this will come up later. I'll make the argument of how it was funded, and it was pretty clever how Peter Daszak got this thing funded. That was the first thing in my thought. DARPA said no. But the U.S. government, it funds everything. There's like billions of dollars in biodefense. It's a $6 trillion a year government right now. Back at pre-pandemic, it was $4 trillion. So something like 14 million is couch change to Uncle Sam. Everything gets funded in Washington, D.C. And the fact that something like this, with the fear and cleavage site emerged in Wuhan, means this grant was funded. It was always hard to figure out who funded it, though. Looking back at it, I think it's kind of easy to tell. But at the time, it was hard to tell. So where do we go from here? I want to get into this, because it's kind of important, because it's in the first paragraph. We will insert them into bat SARS-related is what the R refers to, backbones. These use bat SARS-CoV backbones. These are bat backbones. They are not human backbones, as this one is. This is the human virus called SARS-1 from 2003. This is what's basically like a WIB1 and SHC014 type of virus or gene. genome, which is not human related. These don't circulate in humans. This one did. So the arguments being made, these are exempt from dual use research, gain of function concerns. So that was the first clue something is up here, because there was an email from John Epstein. He's basically Peter Daszak's number 3, to Ralph Baric at the University of North Carolina in March of 2023. That's just before they submitted this. This email came public. You know, it made no sense when it came public in early 2021, late 2020. I mean, none of us, we'd all seen it, but none of us knew what the heck it meant. Looking back at it now, it was obvious. So they want Ralph to, communicate some dual use information. So he did. He gave them, the workaround. We got a workaround, guys. According to Ralph Baric, we were going to work on bat backbones, not human backbones. So these are exempt from dual use research of concern functions. So we all know what gain of function is now. But they've got a workaround now because, again, it's very technical, but they're playing with a bat backbone, not a human backbone. So we're going to infect humanized mice and assess their capacity to cause disease. Our modeling team will build, these phenotype models and whatnot. This really gets into the weeds very quickly. But this is not too uncommon, this TA1, because this looked a lot like the R01 that's been going on with the EcoHealth Alliance. Again, there was always an idea with the R01 grant that someone like Fauci took your tax dollars, tossed it over the Pacific Ocean, and some Chinamen in the Wuhan Institute of Virology may have messed up with Fauci's funding, and then he helped cover that up. So that's kind of what the TA1 looked like, the R01 grant that you've heard about in the news. The TA2 is where the rubber really meets the road. It's technical area 2. We will evaluate 2 approaches here. We're going to do a broad scale immune boosting, and then we're going to do a targeted immune boosting. So you can tell who does what if you start to read into the weeds. Broad scale, I believe, I can say with pretty much utmost confidence, that was Lympha Wang, as we pronounce it, Lympha Wang, as they pronounce it. Responsibility. He is he's the Batman in Singapore, working for Duke University. It's basically Duke University. Duke University in Durham, North Carolina has a bio lab with a bat lab in Singapore, and that's who he works for. They travel to Durham, North Carolina twice a year. But him and Daniel Anderson, did their training there. They pretty much they're U.S. government employees. I don't say I'm U.S. government. They're U.S. academics basically on the U.S. academic payroll, but they are in Singapore where the action is. So he's going to lead the broad scale immune boosting. Dr. Shizeng Li of the Wuhan Institute of Virology is going to conduct viral testing on all collected samples, binding assays, and some humanized mouse work. This was, debated, a lot. Rocky, she was of the USGS. This is going to be her little role in this. She was going to work with the bats, basically, her vaccine delivery work on wildlife bats. And this was going to be the guy that was going to come up with the way to deliver it. So these 2 are not that important. You can kind of remove these 2 from future discussions. I don't want to bog this down, but I do want to focus in on the guy at the top here, Ralph Baric. So he was in the weeds, kind of hiding from the lab leak debate, for lack of a better word. And he would entertain it, but he said those answers were in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and I don't think we'll ever figure out what happened. And, I would call him at best, 75% natural origin, 25% lab leak, but that may be him stretching it because he's pretty firm that he believed in natural origin, even though he was a coronavirus expert, even though he was collaborating with Shizeng Li, even though there was a big cloud over his head. No one really suspected his involvement in the creation of SARS-CoV-2. So this document, when it leaked on September 21st, it was like, wow, there you were the whole time sitting there, talking about, vaccinating bats, antagonizing bats and whatnot. So he will lead the targeted immune boosting work, building on his 2-decade record of reverse engineering COVs and other spike genomes. So TA2 is really in his wheelhouse, essentially. That's what he does. He does genomic engineering. I'll try to separate her, work from his work in another vlog. I don't want to get too far into the weeds here on that. But I'm already getting a little deep into it. But as long as we go through this pretty quickly, I think you can stick with me. I just kind of want to focus on TA2, and I kind of want to focus on the furin cleavage site, and I kind of want to focus on the issues that came of it. So right here is the kicker of a line. This is part of TA2, and they're going to basically insert potential furin cleavage sites, basically at the S1, S2 border that came out in a later FOIA. So you can see them referencing furin cleavage sites down here at the bottom. This shows up later in another document we'll talk about. But when we found out how this thing got funded. So where clear mismatches occur, we will introduce appropriate human-specific cleavage sites and evaluate growth potential in viro and human airway epithelial cells. So that's a heck of a line right there. We will introduce appropriate human specific, essentially those are furin, human means furin, cleavage sites. But that also, the word human kind of threw people off as I later got my brain around this, I don't know why he used the word human specific, but in another document, he kind of gives a glimpse into his mind that when he's talking about furin, he's really talking about the furin of a bat cell, a mammalian bat cell. Mammalian, models are the same across species. So unfortunately, our immune system is very similar to a bat. They are not birds. They're mammals. So this was a lot to do with this. Another thing you want to try and get rid of is the word humanized mice. You won't find that, but 8 times: humanized mice, humanized mice, humanized mice, humanized mice, humanized mice, humanized mice. But you hear 8 times literally. But how many times is the word bat used? I mean, it's 350 times. So that's the first myth I want to try and punch down upon, is the fact that this thing has something to do with humanized mice experiments. Yes, it does, but not for this. You don't ask the U.S. government, DARPA, the U.S. military, for $14 million to experiment on humanized mice. This is where it's at. It's all about bat research in 2018 and 2019. This is where the whole industry has moved. DARPA, NIH, DITRA, I guess. They're all infatuated with bats. I really want to drive that home. Look at this. I can't even go through all this. There's so many mentions of bats. So humanized mice, yes, it's involved, but you don't get $14 million to infect humanized mice. Nor does COVID have much to do with humanized mice. Never in the history of COVID, the most contagious disease on the planet, has one humanized mouse infected another. So just to back up real quick, just to drive home the point how important, bats are. This is Tony Fauci himself editing a bat vaccine paper. It's called a challenge trial, basically, but it's still a bat vaccine paper. This is for Nipah. I mean, you also find Nipah in the DARPA grant. They just, these are all the same kind of, bat-like pathogens. But this is Tony Fauci edited on January 8th of 2020. So even Fauci is involved in the bat research. I really want to drive that home. A lot of people are like,
oh, he's That's true. Look who contributed this. Look who edited this manuscript.
Tony Fauci.
Yeah, I'm the one who pointed that out.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I noticed it right away. Was that Fauci edited it, which was ironic, considering the fact that he didn't do anything. At least,
he's the Academy member who.
He's the Academy member.
Yeah, but you could send it in like we did. But the irony of it is that their grant from the NIH was revoked under his.
Yeah. By the way, he received this.
Yeah, but Tony didn't do that.
No, I think.
But he didn't stand and at least.
I think the NIH head was responsible for that. He agreed to do it.
He agreed to do it.
By the way,
because the alternative was quitting, I'm sure.
This was received by Tony January 8th, 2020.
Yes.
And it was just published. This week, right? Wow.
Yeah, I found it on Monday. But
these guys have been busy.
But wait a minute. But it was accepted on the 17th. So you submit it off. You got your reviews. Your reviewers say, go back and do some more math. Takes you a while to reprogram the computer. You revised your paper. Yeah.
I forgot to plug it in.
Yeah. You revise your paper. You send it back. I mean, this isn't really that surprising.
So Fauci's involved in the bat, research. So this is, a bit of a first clue that, someone could have potentially funded it like him. So I'll come back to that really, but let's stick to the DARPA Defuse document here. When it dropped, the debate started about what the heck they were trying to do in the DARPA Defuse document. So this is one professor on another, the infamous Richard E. Bright here says Wuhan scientists were planning to release enhanced airborne coronaviruses into Chinese bat populations to inoculate them against disease that could jump to humans. Leaked grant proposals dating from 2018 show. So here he chimes in to try and do the alpha dog move. This is incorrect. The grant proposal to vaccinate bats against sarbecovirus is not to release airborne coronaviruses. The idea was largely similar to vaccinating wildlife, foxes, coyotes, raccoons, against rabies, which is effective in reducing human spillover cases. So, and he goes, as I wrote, the proposal calls for aerosol delivery of recombinant SARS-CoV spike proteins and nanoparticles, blah, 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 not aerosol delivery. So, of course, the scientists wanted to, split hairs over this thing. But to start off with, the genome, is very, very, very interesting because of the furin cleavage site. The debate then broke out about who was going to insert that fear and cleavage site, and it took a while for us to figure out who it was, because Baric quit talking to the media after this thing dropped, and everyone was kind of like, well, who is it? And Linfa Wang, as I showed in a previous video, pointed the finger at Baric like a week after this thing dropped and said, yeah, it was his idea. So he never talked to the media ever again. And the second it dropped, I was like, wow, if he's not going to show up and defend himself, it sounds like he may have done something with this, because why didn't he declare it early on? But, you know, I want to show you what happened to this debate, because this document not many Americans or people on the planet even know about, because no one's really ready to talk about it, you know. So as I guess as the suspect list shrunk down, and it basically was just Baric left, you know, not to defend himself. I want to give you another idea of what's going on here. This is the Intercept reporter down here in the bottom right being quizzed, and the Intercept being one of the few news agencies that ran with it. So give them credit. Was zeroing in on who proposed that fear and cleavage site. And while I got this thing up online, I'm gonna say one of my favorite lines here was from a guy named Jack Nunberg at the University of Montana. You know, other scientists contacted by the Intercept noted that there is published evidence that the Women's Virology was already engaged in some genetic research work describing the proposal, and that viruses designed in North Carolina could easily be used in China. The mail is filled with little envelopes with plasmid onto filter paper that scientists routinely send to each other. So this was a big eye-opener to me, because the question, you know, becomes, well, something designed in North Carolina could be used in China. So someone like Ralph Baric could have designed the genome like SARS-CoV-2 and sent it off to China. And that would have been a way for this thing to be done. So see, but some other virologist on the zoonotic side says, oh, the proposal called for genetic engineering work to be done in North Carolina rather than China. But this was being countered by this scientist right here. You know, even if it was done in North Carolina, it could still emerge in Wuhan, because of the way the genomes are shared in these little pieces of plasmid-dried filter paper. So I love that line, essentially. That was Frossinello in that previous clip talking about there's still zero data to support lab origin, he said. So while I'm thinking about it, I kind of want to talk about his line that he showed. So yeah, I'll stick to the plan. I'm going to go with this. So the Intercept basically is zeroed in on Ralph Baric as the primary suspect. So watch what unfolds here. And at one point, the Intercept reporter wants the interview cut.
Work happening.
Right, so the work might have been done in Wuhan because they were collaborating with Wuhan, and so they're passing viruses back and forth. How does that work? Was there some of it being done in North Carolina, or not this type of work, but is there a research lab there that could be a place that some of that work would be done?
Ralph Baric does have a lab that is working on coronaviruses there. That's correct.
Right, gotcha.
Well, Mara, thank you so much.
Well,
you can finish your thought if you have something.
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. Or not this type of work, but is there a research lab there that could, so they're passing virus.
In order to get the grant money, and you're not going to even follow that lead, actually did not even going to investigate that. I mean, that seems strange to me that you've got a guy who's saying
the background of that exchange is Peter Daszak's come out and said Ralph Baric proposed the fear and cleavage site, and this reporter, her name escapes me right now, is antagonizing this reporter. She went on to the New York Times, but it kind of gives you an idea that you know, people are kind of uncomfortable at talking about this grant proposal. I'm not, because you know, I'm just interested in getting to the bottom of this thing. So where do we go from there? Here's Vincent Roncinello talking about it, and this is one of my favorite lines.
It was very cool. By the way, so the other aspect of this grant application, besides putting a poxvirus vectored spike into bats, they want to deliver immune boosting agents into the bats.
Oh.
You know, to boost to induce interferon, for example, and try and clear. I don't know. I like the immunization better.
Yeah. And that grant application, by the way, I think probably because they got it through a FOIA request, and there's this perception that anything that was not already fully disclosed must be some kind of conspiracy.
Oh, of course.
And they blew it up. They blew it up into this story that I don't even know if we should link.
So delivering immune boosting agents was the term that the virologist used there, and I love it because it. We'll find out what I was looking for. The immune boosting agents is a very big piece of this thing. They want to boost the immune system of a bat. As crazy as that sounds, that's how deep they are into the weeds. So Professor Baric here at the bottom of this is page 4. I want to try and separate now who does what, but Professor Baric will lead the targeted immune boosting work, and he's going to develop recombinant chimeric spike proteins to do this. You can see him working his way through all this, the RBD on it. He essentially wants to deliver these immune boosting agents with small molecules. What he's proposing is technically safe, but to the adult bats will expose them. Best candidate go forward. Then he wants to move it forward and extend it to a small group of wild-caught Chinese horseshoe bats at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So that's Ralph Baric, essentially will lead the targeted immune boosting extended to a small group of wild-caught bats at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So that's kind of the piece that everyone forgets. And I'm not deep into the weeds here. I'm on page 4. Below that is the USGS. I'm going to eliminate them as a suspect for various reasons I don't want to get into. And above that was Limpa Wang. He was going to do the broad-scale immune boosting work. So in essence, he's going to identify the immune parameters in the bat's immune system that they can target. And Baric will target those parameters, essentially. But he's going to lead it. That is the important piece here. Baric's going to lead the targeted immune boosting work. This is basically Baric wanting to play with the immune system of a bat. Baric's a bat virologist. He's not a bat immunologist like Limpa Wang and Daniel Anderson, but he's a bat virologist. He can create novel chimeras, they call them, to upregulate the immune system of a bat to try and keep it from harboring pathogens like SARS and MERS and whatnot. So this is another important piece that people just seem to look over because they kind of want to all zero in on Shizeng Li. And I'll get into that here in a minute, I believe. Let's see what this one was about. So these two are going back and forth, whether this thing's safe or not. It is safe, as far as I'm concerned. What they proposed in DARPA Defuse is safe. It's not, well, it may be airborne delivery of a vaccine. It's not transmissible. It's called transferable technology. I'm already getting deep into the weeds, but, you could take Baric's genome and shove it into a bat, and it's not contagious. But it does become expensive when you need to, deliver this agent to the various bats, and you got to do that with some expensive technology. Hence the $5 million. Where was it? The $5 million in where is it? Down here. The $5.8 million for the delivery device was expensive, but the $8 million isn't that expensive in the grand scheme of things. So let's work our way out from there. This can be closed. This can be closed. Again, it's safe as proposed. Technically, it is. The fear and cleavage site freaks out people, but a fear and cleavage site by itself is not going to cause a pandemic. It's got to be aerosolized. It's got to be delivered. It's got to be transmissible, made transmissible, trained to be transmissible. That's in vitro work, which really isn't dangerous. But now Baric is playing with in vivo. This is dangerous. He's playing with live bats, and the question is, what's going on, Baric? Are you looking to vaccinate bats? And he's basically being asked by the USGS gal, Tony Rocky, on the DARPA Defuse program. These came out later. These emails came out later, and even Baric's a bit confused. But I'm looking to deliver immune boosting agents to bats. So what is immune boosting? So I asked that question. What is targeted immune boosting here? And this bat virologist, a colleague of Daniel Anderson's, told me, it's aerosolized immune stimulants, poly-IC. So that's probably, Greek to both me and you. But guess who's in charge of the targeted immune boosting work? Duke University. And they will do it on wild-caught, captive, Rhinolophalus, I think it's pronounced, species bats, Chinese horseshoe bats, at the WIB. So this was another big clue in the DARPA Defuse proposal. It's about wild-caught bats. You can't breed these bats in captivity. They're too picky. They're too hard to feed and breed. Unlike a fruit bat, these insect-eating bats, or just they go out there just like that. The Wuhan Institute of Virology will go out there and catch some bats and stick them inside the Wuhan Institute of Virology for someone from Duke to come in and experiment with them. So this is we're trying to break down the scope of work as it's going on here. So that's a pretty important piece. So why would Baric want to do a targeted immune boosting on Chinese horseshoe bats in the Wuhan Institute of Virology? He told us here with his own words. This is a March 2018. This came out later, thanks to the U.S. Right to Know FOIA of the USGS. Ironically, we got to see what was going on in Baric's minds, because he's not talking, but we can read his words here. I have no bat colony, no way for me to do the experiment, which I definitely think needs to be done, or we have no credibility. This is Baric, basically getting together with this gal at the USGS saying, I need to use your bats in order to test my genomes. So I want to drive home the point that Baric's not talking about, experimenting in humanized mice, which has nothing to do with SARS-CoV-2. He's talking about experimenting with bats, which has something to do with SARS-CoV-2. So he wants to experiment with his novel chimeras in somebody's bats. And he can't do it in his own lab at the University of North Carolina because all he has is mice. And he doesn't have what's called an animal lab. So he has to get together with somebody. And his first somebody was this USGS gal in Wisconsin. And she gave him a price of, I think I have it here in one of these open slides. But it was like $50,000 for her to do it. And that's pretty expensive for, a Western researcher to uphold a bat lab. So, yeah, that was the idea. But again, they were too expensive, so it wasn't funded. But you get an idea of what's going on in Baric's mind here. My understanding, he says, another bat colony exists in China, but not sure who is doing what. So this is why he wants access to some Chinese bats, But instead of having Chinese bats, he's thinking about using a surrogate, like maybe what's called a Mexican free-tailed bat. You'll see that in the DARPA Defuse documents down here as we get further into this. So the next question became, who leaked the document? He exposed himself in January 2022, and his name was Major Joseph Murphy. And he wrote quite the letter for us, basically. It was always unknown who leaked the document to Daszak. Even Daszak didn't know who leaked in the document. So he obviously approached, Rixey under an anonymous, email address and sent him the documents. But his own letter here dropped in January 2022. Project Veritas published it. No one else. And no one else even talked about it except for me and except for now. And here at the top of his letter, just like, the Fear and Cleavage site, being the shocker in Baric's Fear and Cleavage site and DARPA Defuse, this is even bigger shocker for most of us. Because I remember after DARPA Defuse leaked in September, I was like, is that thing a bat vaccine? Is SARS-2 a bat vaccine? And no one else is thinking the same thing, so I just don't want to be the Lone Ranger on this. So January 22 comes around, this thing drops. I think someone told me about it because I wasn't even paying much attention to it. And I went to go read it. I'm like, yes, this guy, he's right here at the top. SARS-CoV-2 is an American-created recombinant bat vaccine. And I'm like, wow, that's line 1 of this, 24-page document. I'm like, that's incredible to me. That is just an incredible statement. But, let's see what else you got in here. And he goes on to call it a live attenuated vaccine. And he explains why. Because of the immune evasion and the way the designer of the vaccine wouldn't want to basically harm the animal. Because like any vaccine, you basically have to evade the immune system in order to deliver the immune response. So he goes on to interferon. He's talking about some pretty good details in here. And one of my favorite, was the idea that this thing was a live attenuated vaccine. And he's essentially pointing at, what I consider to be a pretty big paper. It was, I thought I had it open here, but I guess not. 2018 Baric UGG UCGC is all I need to search for, and there it is. So, when his letter dropped, telling us that this thing was a live attenuated vaccine, I went, wow, that makes this paper make sense, because that's what Baric has been creating here in this 2018 paper. So he's now lost the DARPA Defuse document in early 2018, and now late 2018 he's publishing this paper about live attenuated vaccines, and a lot of people thought it was for humans, but it's for bats, such as bats. So there he says it. Furthermore, reservoir species such as bats. So Baric has created a live attenuated vaccine for bats in this late 2018 paper that again references the Moyjang mine shaft and this infamous UGG-CGC genome, which I won't get into here, which is also found in the RATG13, the Laus-Banal sample, and even SARS-CoV-2. So this was a big deal for me. This document. This is an insider telling us outsiders what SARS-CoV-2 is. This Major Murphy chap. His story checks out. He's quite the hero in my book. He's the American hero. He's sitting in the back room of DARPA during the pandemic, and he's getting a lay of the land and listening to the others talk. These alphas at the front of the room basically probably debating about this thing, and I think they obviously pieced it together. The only people that could tell us what SARS-CoV-2 was the people that asked for something like SARS-CoV-2 to be created. Here they were in October 2018 soliciting for something like SARS-CoV-2. Then here we are, 3 years later, and they're all obviously in the same DARPA room, basically getting together, trying to piece this thing together. And Major Murphy's sitting in the back of the classroom. He's just a fellow, relatively young guy, on loan to DARPA for the pandemic. And he did his own analysis and gave his own conclusion. This thing's a bad vaccine, a live attenuated vaccine. So, it's I don't want to get too far into the weeds here, because I republished this in my book, if you want to read it, with all of this Project Veritas stuff on here. So, it's more edible to read there. I can't even search it here with this document I pulled up. So, he goes on and on and on. He's a little confused, though, about, SARS-CoV-2 not infecting bats. So this is where I came in. All I did was just fact check, Major Murphy's letter. And he says, it doesn't affect bats. So my little, bat vaccine theory doesn't quite make sense there. And I thought to myself, well, it does make sense, because, someone else has been talking about bat research, and it was, again, Billy Bosticson. I remember this thread very distinctly in February of 2021. So this is before DARPA Defuse League. Billy Bosticson, the ringleader of Daszak, had done a thread, one of his many threads here. This is before I was following Lab Leak in February 2021, but I'm not into the details of it. But to see this about live bats in Wuhan, this was, he had found a patent basically for the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and he found a statement here by Xi Zhengli tending to the bats. And I'm like, wow, those dirty Chinese and their dirty bats. That's just, more evidence that this thing leaked from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, more evidence this bat virus has something to do with, bat viruses, not bat vaccines in my mind at the time, but it's pretty detailed. But then Bosticson goes off on this tangent, and he's soon talking about Atlanta, Georgia, like not Georgia the country, Atlanta the state here in the United States. And he's talking about, in particular, here you see Limpa Wang up here. So this is one of these beautiful threads that he's done. This is a guy on the DARPA Defuse proposal. The Batman is doing research on bats. So here he's found a paper in Atlanta, Georgia. That's down here in the south of the U.S. in their BSL-4. Doing work with live bats. And I remember just sitting there reading this thread at the time. I was just like amazed at this thing. Like, wow. This thing's come home to roost. There's live bat research going on in the US CDC lab, essentially in Atlanta, Georgia, and it's Egyptian fruit bats. And I remember that, in the back of my mind. And when Murphy's telling us SARS-CoV-2 doesn't infect bats, I said, well, it does infect bats, it infects Egyptian fruit bats was my first thought. So there was my first clue that this thing is, this thing may have been funded and developed and maybe, an American lab, animal. So that lab animal is called the Egyptian fruit bat. And they called, this German lab tested their Egyptian fruit bat colony early in the pandemic. And they came to the conclusion that, their Rosetta's Egyptian fruit bats could reflect a reservoir host status and therefore be a useful model for the pandemic. But they go on to say, although this species is certainly not the original reservoir of SARS-CoV-2 because these bats are not present in China. So this is now in 2022. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, essentially. But I'm telling you where my thought process led, and I'm just fact-checking Murphy's letter here. He wrote it in August of 2021. At the same time, I thought, at the time myself, I thought, COVID was some sort of PLA, biodefense program by the Chinese army, for humans, a human vaccine. So to find maybe a human, I was thinking self-disseminating vaccine because it's so contagious, but to find out this thing may be a self-disseminating bat vaccine developed in American, bats and shipped off to Wuhan for testing is now coming into play after reading this letter. So, the DARPA Defuse, this was the guy that leaked DARPA Defuse to Rixey and Daszak. He's now announced who he is. So he's a hell of a story. I've never talked to him. I would love to. But just to dive deeper into it, because he's so important, he's the one that went in there and found the documents, essentially. So I always thought it was a bit of a hokey story. He goes on here to say, I found the DARPA Defuse document in a top secret folder. I mean, it just sounded like too cloak and dagger for me, but that's exactly where he found it. And later on, one of these senators in the U.S. Filed a FOIA on behalf of him and asked the DOD what the heck was it doing, in a top secret folder, because this isn't a top secret project. And I don't know if I can find the exact verbiage in here, but maybe it is here. The files were transferred to JWICS. I can't tell you what that acronym is. Basically, a file within the files to support sharing with intelligence community partners who do not routinely maintain unclassified email addresses. So they moved it into a classified folder to share it with the classified email addresses. Although the BAA, the BAA term is, well, we've already talked about over here. The BAA. Although the BAA, we're gonna find my spot after I lost it. Although the BAA was not ever funded by DARPA, so they claimed it was not funded, but they claimed it did exist. So they have confirmed, DARPA has confirmed this thing existed. They have given us a bureaucratic reason to why they moved it into a top secret folder, which is where Major Murphy found it, and that's what caught his attention. The thing was sitting in an unclassified document, moved into a classified folder sometime in the summer, May of 2021, and they DARPA came up with this kind of bureaucratic explanation. Take it for what it's worth. You believe it? I don't know if I do either, but it's weird why this unclassified document was moved into a classified folder. So he discovered it. This is Murphy's baby. I thought someone maybe gave it to him and they told him to get him off site, but no. He discovered it on his own. So this is my favorite part. Everyone's like, who funded it? Of course, the most of the people on Daszak side of the Lab Leak Ledger, because of the sunk cost, I think, were like, well, China funded it because, it leaked from a Chinese lab. And I think our primary suspect may be Tony Fauci himself. I don't think people understand how deep he is into the biodefense community. So, the fact that he's editing a bat vaccine paper on January 8, 2020 tells you that he was interested in this kind of research. So the same Senator Marshall, the day after Murphy's letter dropped, the founder of the DARPA Defuse document, who leaked it to us via Daszak, has asked Tony Fauci here in this hearing on, I guess it's March of 2022. I thought it was earlier than that. I'll play this here if I can. Full screen.